In this video, we would be exploring DeepSeek, a popular model that's been making buzz in the last few weeks. If you're a software engineer, if you're generally curious about AI, or you just want to know what the noise about DeepSeek is, keep watching this video. The video is broken down into sections. In the description, you could easily navigate to a specific section you want, and let's get right into the video. Now, for DeepSeek, they released an R1 model, which has been quite interesting. It's been making headwaves, and it's led to crazy things happening, including like stock prices fluctuating. So R1, they say, is live and is open source. This is their latest model. If you look at their site, you can see different ways to access like whatever. But back to the capabilities, this was V3, the one preceding R1, and it had some good performance in comparison to other models you can see across these different ones. Key ones are like the coding, though Anthropic Sonnet still like performs slightly better in some areas, but this is what the previous performance, and the R1 is basically further improved based on this model. So talking about some of the key features is we'll look at the DeepSeek area in terms of research and coding. Those are like the major things people have been largely discussing about and what they are using it for. It's also like a reasoning model, so it kind of does something quite interesting, which we would get into. And it's comparatively performant in respect to the OpenAI reasoning series of model, which is like the O1, which is what they are using as a good selling point, saying it's rivaling OpenAI O1 model and is available on specific set of platforms. So what do they mean? Let's quickly go to some of their releases just to get an idea of what's been happening. So they released R1 and they're claiming the performance is on par with OpenAI O1. O1 is one of the reasoning models OpenAI released that really did well. And key characteristics are it's open source, it has technical report or researches, so you could read more about that if you want to know how it works. They have it licensed on their website and API, and this is where we can access it. So these are some of the comparative performance as all models do. They compare it with the O1, O1 mini. And this is like the bonus point, which is quite interesting, is they still from this R1, they went further to produce small models, which are also fully open sourced and with less number of parameters. And they are keen on saying they are trying to empower the open source community, which is quite different from what OpenAI is doing. OpenAI is a bit closed source as regards a lot of things. And these are also the characteristics. If you could find in the description this link and read more about the details. Another interesting thing is the cost. It's relatively way cheaper than the OpenAI model. So that's one of the shockers that happened, for which a lot of people have been doing the performance to cost analysis and understanding that so they can actually get models or utilize models, especially developers integrating with the endpoint at a way cheaper model for more tokens. And they've been quite in the space for some time. You can see their releases, so it's not like it just came out of nowhere, contrary to what the buzz might seem, but the R1 made significant buzz. So let's check out the platform itself. So this is what it looks like. And some things to point out is sometimes it can get slow. Sometimes you might have issues logging in because they have been experiencing some attacks of recent. There was a time they had issues with users not being able to log in because they were DDoS, which is like they were being hit with a lot of malicious traffic. And in some cases, the model might be slow because it's being loaded a lot, and sometimes it gives very, very short responses just to complete your request. So this is the DeepThink, which kind of gives you a preview into how the model arrives at the answer. It can also search the web, quite the same with the OpenAI model. So we would try two prompts just to see that. One prompt we would try is just to ask the model if it can find like relationship between two distinct fields. say quantum physics and classical literature. Let's see what the model comes up with. So this is what it comes up with without DeepThink, and it just sort of writes something. Okay. Now, while it's still doing that, we would use the DeepThink just for it to see quite the difference in the responses. And one thing about this is the fact that when people get to see, we the users get to see how it's thinking or coming to conclusion as regards the response it gives, it sort of increases the trust. And one thing this also does, it gives us a preview or a possible preview into how the OpenAI equivalent also does the reasoning stuff, which is like the O1 mini. But in OpenAI, you wouldn't see this thinking capability, say. So this is how it thought, or this is at the set of steps it went through before it provided this answer. And you would see it thought for 21 seconds, and you can get an insight into some of the things it thought about. It says the user is asking for an unexpected connection between this and this. The previous answer covered this. Wait, there's also quantum entanglement. How does that relate to the literature? So this set of steps is going through is quite interesting. You feel a little bit connected. You feel a little bit of trust. And if you're not satisfied with the reasoning, you wouldn't much bother to check the response. So we could also check another one saying if it can create a storyline. So same thing applies if we can create a storyline of a sci-fi narrative, and that's same procedure goes through and through. And this also might be a plus to the OpenAI because it also tries to force people. It gives people like a free preview into what it's like using an OpenAI Pro or an OpenAI Plus, especially utilizing their reasoning models. But this time, the only difference is on DeepSeek, it's free, so anyone can use this. So that's the interesting thing about it. Two things is it's free, and you can get insight into the reasoning, and it's highly effective so far from the reviews I've read. In comparison with coding, most people are slightly saying Anthropic. Sonnet is slightly better, but DeepSeek doesn't necessarily, the R1 doesn't necessarily give a bad response. But yeah, it's slightly better there. And in terms of research, it's doing okay. Although depending on the prompts, depending on the kind of questions, it still tries to give a close to accurate response. Some of the things they are facing so far, it's like they recently had a data leak attack, and because of that, there are concerns about data because the data leak attack they had, the internet can have access to users' chat history and so on, but they fixed it immediately, so it wasn't like a vulnerability that was existing. And so far, it's been much more reliable, the platform in itself, over the last few days compared to when it was pretty hot. Now, some of the claims that we've heard about DeepSeek is the pricing. So one of the things that was shocking was how much they spent on expenditure. They were claiming like they spent $5.5 million, but on further research, found that that was on the final run. So it wasn't that they used 5.5 million to actually develop the whole model, but that's how much they spent on like the final run or the final training. They did spend a bit more than 5 million, but I think the money made much more noise, thinking that okay, they are achieving much more effective performance as regards cost. So other firms or other research firms are claiming they spent about $1.6 billion in total, which is feasible, but they are also saying that the $5.5 million that is not for the whole training. So definitely they spent more than that. And it also tells us that they can effectively improve this over time because they also produce some way more models from the R1. So it's kind of an interesting time to see how much more interesting models will come out of this and how people will definitely play around with this locally and they can do more with less. So the fact that it's cheap is a bit kind of evening the ground for a lot of people to test and play around with, and it's open source. Those are some of like the strong points about DeepSeek, the reasoning part, the open source part, and the areas of strength so far, what I would say is it's good for research, it's good for coding, and because of the reasoning capabilities, it can definitely help infer or come to reasonable conclusions from different data sources. But so far, Anthropic Sonnet is still top there for coding. Open source. When we say DeepSeek is open source, what does it actually mean? That's a kind of common question. What that actually means is that you can go to their repo, the R1 repo, and you could play around with it. You could check stuff. You could see their research papers. You could see their models. You could decide to, this is the base model from which they trained this one from. You could download the model itself, see some of the evaluation results. And from doing that, you could also play around with it locally. So they have all those things available to the public. There's nothing hidden from the public. So that's what it means when we say DeepSeek is open source, and the DeepThink feature is a good one. Now, if we look at some of the downsides to what DeepSeek might actually be facing at the moment is the major concern right now is developed by the Chinese. So folks in the US are much concerned about data because most of the data will be stored in the warehouses and privacy. So recently, there are some countries that ban DeepSeek, especially for their government officials. The use of DeepSeek should not be used to transfer sensitive information, or they do not use they should not use DeepSeek to get some certain information. One of those countries is Australia. Australia decides to ban this on government devices. South Korea also did some in some recent time, which is like 2, 3 days ago. So aside that, just the data and security concern is one of the things being pointed out about that. But overall, it's really a good product. It's quite cost effective, easy to use, generally available to the public. But if you compare it to some of the model like ChatGPT Pro, this is like a pro subscription. But if you look at the O1 model, I would say they are relatively competitive, And it's quite interesting that DeepSeek kind of gives you a preview because the O1 models are paid for, but DeepSeek gives you a preview of what's like using an O1 model. And in some scenarios, O1 can be much more better. In some scenarios, DeepSeek might be more better. But you can always try the DeepSeek, see how it feels. Let me know in the comment section your experiences with that product, if it's pretty straightforward, if you enjoyed it. And in another video, we would explore the O3, ChatGPT. The O3, OpenAI responded with a new model called O3, which they are claiming is way superior to all other models that has been released. And they also have data to support that. And it's quite interesting because now they are also pushing for the fact that this is cost effective, way much more performant, and way better than the R1 model. So it's quite an interesting time in this space to see a lot of developments, a lot of things improving. Let me know your thought about DeepSeek. Let me know how, when you use the platform, how did you see it? What are some of the things you've used it for and your interesting feedbacks? That's it for this video. Bye.